Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So Robert Byrd, now deceased, qualifies as a conservative, a traditionalist respectful of the status quo, as compared with neocons or other Republican reactionaries who are at war with the status quo. What they want is a radical rollback by at least 1 century to at least pre-New Deal and probably pre-progressive era, that is, say, pre-1890. So they want complete deregulation and a complete savage, wild capitalist free market, meaning, of course, the rule of the jungle and too bad if you die. Couple of moments. Byrd, of course, opposed, as I recall, the Bush tax cuts as irresponsible. Correct. The tax cuts for the rich, of course, trickle-down economics don't work. They simply feed bubble economy, as we saw then. In 1986, when Byrd, along with Jim Wright, took over as the two leaders in the legislature there, the Congress, against Reagan, this was the time when Wright put through his attempt to create a Tobin tax on Wall Street speculative turnover. But I think the shining moment for Byrd in recent years was his really lonely fight against the Iraq war, when most Democrats wouldn't go with him. Republicans were all with Bush. This was in January, February, March of 2003, when he would go to the floor of the Senate and then look right into the camera and say, they're destroying your Constitution. He'd take out the Constitution and he would show it. That is a traditionalist. And, of course, the so-called defenders of the Constitution today on the right, the Tea groups and Tea parties, they're all warmongers. They don't seem to have any concern about the Constitution, at least that part of the Constitution, which they don't like. They also don't like the general welfare clause. So they have some parts that they like, some parts that they invent. Now, the Russian spy ring. Well, the Hamburger Summit was the most normal U.S.-Russian summit ever, really, because it was not held in wartime. And as soon as this is over, the FBI comes out with this 10 or 11-person spy ring. Now, clearly, it's a very low-value spy ring. It's a very feckless spy ring. This is not the corridors of power. They're not recruiting government officials who can give state secrets. You can see my commentary on Russia Today last Monday up on the website, tarpley.net. A lot of play in the New York tabloids for Anna Chapman, the Mata Hari operative. It's a little bit like the U-2. We won't go into all the details in the U-2. I do that in the commentary. But it's evidently one of two things, or maybe both. There's a faction in U.S. intelligence, British intelligence above all, where the anti-Russian stuff is deeply, deeply rooted. They don't like the rapprochement of Obama with Medvedev. They think that has gone too far, so they want to essentially torpedo that. On the other side, you may have forces inside Russia who also feel that Medvedev is going too far. Maybe they feel he's being duped because he's not getting meaningful concessions. He's giving up a lot of things, right? The Russians are willing to vote against Iran in the UN Security Council. What did they get for that? Not much. So they might have said, this is a low-value network. Why don't we, tell them to do egregious things and then we'll sacrifice them. And then obviously the beneficiary of that would be Putin, whose stock is rising even as that of Medvedev is going down, as I understand it, inside the internal councils of the Kremlin. So again, see that on Russia Today. But now we have the 4th of July, so let's do a little something for the 4th of July. Remember, the Declaration of Independence adumbrates a conspiracy theory, and here I want to send you to my book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA, Chapter 12, Conspiracy Theory, the Great American Tradition. The neocons say, all conspiracy is paranoid. Well, go back to the interesting book by Bernard Bailyn, professor of history at Harvard University, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, 1967. The basic belief of the U.S. Founding Fathers was a conspiracy theory that the British oligarchy was conspiring to impose slavery on the North American colonies. George Washington, Fairfax Resolution, 1774, with George Mason, saying there's a regular systematic plan of oppression with the British government endeavoring by every piece of art and despotism to fix the shackles of slavery upon us. Washington writes in a letter at the same time, beyond the smallest doubt, these measures of the British are the result of deliberation, I am as fully convinced as I am of my own existence that there has been a regular, systematic plan framed to enforce them. Thomas Jefferson, 1774. Single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of the day. A series of oppressions begun at a certain period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers too plainly prove a deliberate and systematic plan of reducing us to slavery. This is essentially 2 years before the Declaration of Independence. The language is the same. John Adams, 1774. The conspiracy was first regularly formed and begun to be executed in 1763 or 1764. Adams saw a junto conspiracy, profoundly secret, dark, and deep. These are all quotes collected by Balin. The Royalists see it the same way. So that gets us to July 4th, 1776, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. The history of the present King of Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. And I'd like to include Lincoln, obviously equal or superior to any individual founding father. The House divided speech of 1858, conspiracy theory there too. We cannot know that all of these adaptations are the result of pre-concert. But when we see a lot of framed timbers, the portions of which we know to have been gotten out at different times and places by different workmen, Stephen, that's Stephen Douglas, Franklin Pierce, the previous president, Roger Taney, the Chief Justice at the time, Dred Scott monstrosity, James, the current president, James Buchanan, 1861. So when you get Stephen, Franklin, Roger, and James, when we see all of these timbers joined together as we see them to make the frame of a house or a mill, in such a case, says Lincoln, we find it impossible not to believe that Stephen and Franklin and Roger and James all understood each other from the beginning. They all worked upon a common plan or draft before the first lick was struck. So Lincoln joins Jefferson, Adams, Washington as conspiracy theorists. And if we look at Eric Foner's works on the Civil War, Republican ideology, the Republican Party is founded on a conspiracy theory. That is Seward's theory of the slave power conspiracy. So that's the heritage. We always want to be looking out for false flag events. As we approach these possible cataclysmic events in the financial structure prefigured by this Citibank collapse, by this peak in the credit default swaps on the Southern European debt, all of this can come into rapid motion. There can be tremendous tremors. This then reminds us that the native, the indigenous traditional method of analysis here is to not to make everything dependent on conspiracies, not to reduce the world to conspiracy, certainly not, because objective reality remains. Military, economic, and other factors out there are real. But in terms of manipulating them, and especially when you're dealing with an oligarchy, which tends to operate this way, right? A tyrant doesn't need it. A mob is not capable of it. But in the middle, there's the broad majority of human affairs, which is small groups of people. The conspiracy plays a large role. So July 4th, 1776, a conspiracy theory sent forth into the world. And that then leaves us with this question of the inalienable rights. Kagan obviously does not believe in them. Notice that modern liberalism, liberalism of the Democratic Party post-1970 or thereabouts, believes that there are no objective criteria of right and wrong. Well, there are, and they are rooted in the social existence of human beings and in the qualities that they all share. And the first of these is cognition. This is what makes you human. This is why you get classified as a human being. You have cognitive faculties, and the fostering of those and the social utility of those, that's the basis of the rights that must be respected. They come from God or from ontology or metaphysics, You can say this in any way you like, but they must be respected. The Constitution guarantees them. You use them to construe the Constitution. So down with Kagan and long live the inalienable right. And we'll see you next week.